Welcome. This is Alistair Noct. I've received a lot of email questions, and the questions focus on the recent upheaval and civil unrest, and more specifically, socialism. So I thought I would provide my thoughts on socialism. Socialism begins as a utopia type mentality. Everyone's going to be equal. Everyone will have the same rights. But what happens is slowly those rights are eroded, because once you bring thugs into power, the whole idea of equality turns into something totally different. Be careful playing with this dangerous thing called socialism. Sounds great in theory. Wouldn't we all want to live in a world where there was peace and everyone was equal and everyone had the same rights? But it seems like throughout history, the first thing the socialists do is take your rights away. Look back in history. Don't take my word for it. Do your research. Draw your own conclusions. Remember, you're not sheep, although socialists think you are. I'm at the age where I've seen a lot of things happen in history. For many years, I served the government outside of the military, and I actually traveled to some of these places that have been such great success stories of socialism, which basically eroded into communism. I want you to keep one thing in mind. On the highway of life, socialism is one exit away from communism. If you don't believe me, do your research. But don't do your research on social media. Don't do your research by listening to mainstream media. It's all fake news. They do it because they are publicly held companies, and their job is to make money, not report factual events. What sells better than tribulation, murder, beatings, and rape? All of those things are great sales tools for media. Who wants to report on Joe Blow down the street that did something nice for his neighbor? Who gives a shit, right? That does not sell. So you have to look at what the motivation is of mainstream media, and you need to look at everyone's motivation, okay? Ask, what is it within itself? What are these people trying to sell me, and why? Once you understand a person's motivation, then you can understand the message and why they take the position they're taking. But you have to be smart about this. If you say CNN said, then you're an idiot. Look at the facts and look at the data. Look at the information. And above all, look at what they are trying to say and what they are trying to sell. Understand that they are selling you something, and you need to figure out what that is. Listen, once we go down this slippery slope of socialism, there's no turning back. We can't reverse it and say, the water's too cold, I'm not going in there. No, at that point, it's over. Just as we saw in Nazi Germany when the socialists came to power. And by the way, Nazis never held a majority in the German government. Did you know that? That's how easy these things can happen. The first thing that they did is to take away the people's rights. They took away firearms because obviously a well-armed militia is not a socialist concept. So once you start down that slippery road, you're going to continue down it. Freedom and liberty are precious things, and there are those who, for their own reasons, want to erode our republic and turn it into a socialist state. And they have really found a bunch of idiots who buy into that and who are willing to do their dirty work. Remember, Adolf Hitler had the brown shirts, nothing more than thugs, and that's what we're seeing today. If you disband the rule of law and you take away basic law, then you can basically do whatever you want. Now that may sound enticing to some of you listening, but wait, just wait until someone does what they want to you. It may not be so enticing, but you're already there because you let it happen. And once again, starting down that slippery slope, there's no turning back. After all, there was no recall vote for Adolf Hitler. He made himself chancellor. So how do you unring the bell? You don't. Once you're there, you're there. And the only thing that can happen is some kind of crushing event that causes socialism to collapse. And we've seen that in the past as well. Do you really want to live through something like that? I mean, the USSR lasted from the end of World War II until the end of the 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s. That's a long time. Those people lived under a tyrannical administration where few people had wealth and status, and everyone else was a worker for the state. Everyone was equal. Absolutely. They didn't have enough to eat. They stood in line for bread for thousands upon thousands of rubles. Yeah, everybody was equal. And that's the way the government wanted it. And they had certain mechanisms like the KGB and the DDR or GDR, German Democratic Republic, who could easily go around and quash any murmurings and uprisings. In those environments, you dare not say anything about the government because you never know who's listening. Your neighbor, your brother, your cousin, your father. All of these people had incentive to turn you into the government and ship you off to the gulag. If you take freedom of speech for granted, freedom of speech will be taken away. If you think that socialism works, you're a fool. If you want to try socialism, go to China. Because although China has put a pretty face and a lot of lipstick on a pig, they are still a communist country, and the communist ideology has not changed. The only thing that has happened is China has realized that in order to conquer the world, they're going to have to change their tactics. But do you really think that those people in China have the freedoms that we do here in the U.S. and in other countries? No. So you may ask, well, why doesn't the Chinese media report on this? It's because it's owned by the Communist government of China. You don't think that they're going to put that stuff out? So if someone comes over to your house because you've been running your mouth against the government, and they drag your ass out and they put a bullet in the back of your head and throw you in the back of a truck, do you really think that that's going to end up on the Chinese media? First of all, they control the media. It's owned and controlled by the state, and everything is reviewed and vetted before it goes out to the population. Secondly, CNN or any of these other, quote, news outlets, end quote, even got a whiff of this, would be shot down if they tried to report it because it goes against their socialist message. Yes, their socialist message. Democrats, social democrats, socialists, communists. Ultimately, we're all really talking about the same thing, and that's where we're going. That's exactly where we're going. And if you don't think so, continue to live in denial, because people like me won't be around to remind you of this after socialism happens, because people like me will be the first ones who end up with a bullet in the back of their head. Don't forget, even in our country a few decades ago, people were burned at the stake as witches. Now you may say, this can never happen. We're much too civilized for that. We've grown, we're educated, we have so much technology at our fingertips. Yeah, well, see what that looks like out on the street. See what's happening. Does that look like a civilized culture to you? Where are these Black Lives Matter folks? Why aren't they sitting down and having an intelligent conversation? Because I think most people are reasonable, and most people would certainly understand that there have been some injustices. However, beating someone over the head is probably not the best way to get your message across unless you have an ulterior motive. Don't forget, there are some very high-ranking and very wealthy people in this country and outside of this country that would like to see nothing more than our republic fall, because if that happened, the United States would be a free-for-all for those who were privileged, and for all the rest of us, we would be slaves. Keep that in mind. Here's your 1/4 ounce of bread and your beef bouillon cube. Now, shut the fuck up. I know people are taking advantage of these things. I've seen it. That's what people do. I've seen this done so many times in different environments. It's a bait and switch. It's also distraction. You start something, and while other people are paying attention to that, outraged over whatever that thing is, no one is really watching what's going on. There are levers of power, and there are very powerful people who are not in this for anything other than their own benefit. They have their own special interests, and there's no changing that. It's been that way and will remain that way, and they will exploit anything that happens. The song, "Everybody Wants to Rule the World," is pretty much true. I know if I could rule the world, I certainly would, and you would too. Don't say you wouldn't. So think about it. If certain things are within your reach and within your objectives and your grasp, and you don't reach out and take those, that would make you a fool, correct? When the opportunity presents itself, as the old saying goes, when there's blood on the street, buy land. And in my opinion, this means during calamity and upheaval and social unrest, many people will make a grab for power, for money, expand their span of control, advance their agenda. Politicians do this all the time, and they're doing it right now. So educate yourself and think about these things. Picture what it's going to be like under a socialist government. Everything that you know, like social media, will be controlled by the state and will only be a message of propaganda. It will be spewed 24 hours a day. We already see that in mainstream media anyway. Try to find some real news about what is happening beyond bashing Trump, viruses, and riots. So what can you do? First, you can get educated, and you can also realize that everyone is trying to sell something. You just have to figure out what that is. Secondly, you can start standing up for what you believe in, and you can stop being swayed by these numbskulls who are just simply anarchists. That's all they are. What does it really matter about black lives, white lives, any lives? No lives really matter to the leaders of our governments. Remember, you're just the person that pays taxes and pays their salary. So why should they really care about what you want? As long as you keep your head down and you keep working, it's all good. Remember, you elected these people, and they don't elect you. They're here to serve you. Although some people, like socialists, have actually adopted the position that we work for them. They're going to be the great equalizers. They're going to make things equal. Well, you know what? Things are not equal. Things will never be equal. Things have never been equal. Even in these great success story countries like Venezuela, Russia, Cuba, and ultimately China. See what happens. You need to think about the road we're on. Think about the future you want, and you need to start preparing. Thank you for your support, and I will certainly rise to the challenge to share my thoughts on these things. Long live our republic, and until next time, this has been Alistair Knott. Hail Satan.